Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So let me make sure I am up. I was having trouble signing on last night or early this morning. It looks like the connection is stable. Let me check my sound. Yeah, right, good. Perfect. Alright guys, hope everyone had a decent day today. I came across a story. Oh, and before I get into this particular part, first of all, I want to thank all of you guys for all of the, I guess you can say, good words, all of the show of support with my channel. My live stream capabilities went down. It is immensely appreciated. People had a lot of kind words and everything else. Most people were like, what the fuck? And YouTube is on some shit right now. But no, I appreciate it. I honestly appreciate it. It helps a lot. Also, coming up, I have Grant Cameron. Grant Cameron is a UFO investigator. He is one of my favorite UFO investigators. My understanding of the world, meaning my oddity or my weirdness of experiences going back since I was like 17 years old, lines up extraordinarily well with the way he explains the world. He goes into consciousness. In fact, most of his stuff at this point is, no, that's not true. He goes full well into consciousness, though. He's more so in that camp. But he intersects with the UFO thing. He's fucking fascinating. So he's going to be here on Wednesday. And also Hard Bastard is going to be here on Wednesday. Hard Bastard is, he's a network. He has a channel himself on. And somewhat, I guess you can say, center-right of sorts. It's hard to explain it. But he focuses on this thing of media, this intersection of media and bullshit. And so him and I are going to have this conversation about media and the BS that these guys have been pushing. In addition to this idea of censorship, because one of his videos was censored a while back too. He went after TYT and they shut his channel down. So those are coming up for next week. That should be fucking awesome. One of my subscribers, Kelly, she posted this item on Twitter. Her and I were talking back and forth, and she kind of mentioned that NBC News is pushing a fake news story, or at the very least a story that is being debunked by DHS, or DHS is at least trying to debunk the story. Now, I'm going to go through this story with you because I think the story is fascinating, and it gets across your media is not unbiased, and your media is not objective. That's what it gets across. There's certain things that they assume into it. It's almost like there's a propaganda built into it. Even going to the thing of establishing a point that you haven't really established and moving on from there. So it's, we're insisting this. And now that we've insisted this, we're moving on to this to talk about something else. Built upon the logic of the thing that we've said has been established, even though that thing hasn't been established. Like, it's a fascinating article to read. DHS didn't just push back. DHS put a knife up in them. Put out a press release saying that what these people are saying is not true. And beyond what DHS is saying, I think it's false and misleading, the states themselves, meaning NBC News is pushing a Russian hacking narrative. Now, DHS said that's not true. The states themselves said it's not true. I think it was one state that said they were penetrated or compromised. And what they're using for this is the previous administration. Like, they're literally using officials in the previous administration as being the bellwethers on this, completely trusting that what they're being told is perfectly right and perfectly accurate. I love this. This is fucking fascinating. It's like you have one group of people who are in the intelligence community saying that's not true, and you have another group saying it is true. And the news people, being stenographers that they are, and having their own favorites, meaning they like the previous administration, they don't like this administration. And having established, at least to themselves, that Russia had something to do with the election hacking. Now, mind you, when they talk about this, they're not clear on what they're talking about. Oftentimes, they use words like meddling, compromise, probed, scanned. All of this purely depends upon what the individual who's hearing these words and who's seeing these words believes those words to mean. Meaning, ultimately, them saying those things don't really get across what those things actually mean. When they do this for very specific reasons. They don't want to be very specific and straight with you. Being very specific and straight with you requires a certain amount of context. You can essentially apply this into the larger world to understand how much weight should I give for what I am being told. Is this more true than not? And even if it is true, How should I regard this in the larger world, in the grand scheme of things, based on my own actions, based on my own country's actions, and based on how countries act in the world? Just a normal way of going about their affairs. It's propaganda. That's my point. And it's insidious. It's why I don't necessarily watch news, like talking about, or at the very least not watch like one dedicated source and to spread it around. They are really pushing this narrative. Like they're going whole hog on it. So this is the article that I'm referring to. And I kind of want to talk about this as I go through it, because there's certain parts of it I really want to flag and I really want to put a pin into, because it requires further conversation about. So NBC News pushing a Russian hacking narrative. U.S. intelligence. Russia compromised 7 states prior to the 2016 election. Well, that's interesting. Even right here. U.S. intelligence. What do they mean by that? What U.S. intelligence? The people in the DHS say what you're saying is wrong. You've had other intelligence officials say what you're saying is wrong. So which U.S. intelligence? And aren't you being selective with regards to who you're considering U.S. intelligence? The answer is yes. You're using people from the prior administration who has a dog in the hunt. They're acting as if these people don't have a dog in the hunt, as being the bellwether and explaining what's taking place. Let's keep going. You're going to love this. The U.S. intelligence community developed substantial evidence that the state websites or voter registration systems in 7 states were compromised by Russian-backed covert operatives prior to the 2016 election, but never told the states involved, according to multiple U.S. officials. That's another thing that we need to talk about. That's another thing, because again, they're making that like an anomaly. But what if that's not an anomaly? Like, people are coming out saying, Obama should have said something to these other states. If Russia was doing this, Obama should have said something. This was a horrible dereliction of duty. You didn't protect the country as the president of the United States. What if he never told anybody anything because there was nothing to tell? Like, this will make perfect sense if all of this was a political con job. Meaning, in 2015, the email being sent in WikiLeaks, I showed it in one of my other videos, them talking about using Trump and Russia, the bromance between the two, in order to slaughter Donald Trump. And shattered immediately, a day after Hillary Clinton lost the reality show host. Her coming out saying, I didn't lose because I was a horrible candidate, and I didn't lose because people hated me. I lost because of that fucking Russia. Comey's an asshole too, but that fucking Russia. This stuff was planned going back years and years and years before this was enacted as somewhat of a fail-safe strategy in order to tar Donald Trump with this stuff. Yes, they were surveilling his campaign using the FBI. Is it possible that the reason that Obama didn't do anything, meaning say anything about this, or that he didn't raise red flags about this, is because there was nothing to raise? The amount of interaction between countries on this was the same as the amount of interaction in the normal processes. In which case, there will be nothing for him to tell. There will be nothing for him to notify. And certainly nothing for him to notify, to scream at the top of his lungs that Russia is meddling, probing, scanning, interacting, or posting Twitter ads. There's nothing to show here. I think that's my point. That's the point I'm getting at. I may not be saying this well. But it's possible that they were never told because there was nothing to tell, as opposed to them making the assumption that they were never told because of incompetence. I'm saying it's their assumptions that are built into this. This is kind of what I'm getting at. They're assuming that Republicans are completely wrong in saying that there seem to be a political dog in the hunt. They assume that. They assume that they are completely right in regards to this Russia hacked us narrative. Despite the competing evidence that goes against them, they're assuming that they're right. So from that point, everything kind of flows from the basic assumptions that these guys are going with. And at that point, they don't necessarily try to nail down those assumptions. They're just kind of off to the races. They just start asserting stuff. Top secret intelligence requested by President Obama in his last weeks in office identified 7 states where analysts, synthesizing months of work, had reason to believe Russian operatives had compromised the state websites or databases. They had reason to believe it. 3, and understand who we're talking about. Requested by President Obama in the last weeks in his office identified 7 states where analysts. So again, understand the source. Understand the source. That's all I'm getting at. Understand the source. And you have to ask yourself the follow-up question of, is there an incentive in the source of this information to not necessarily be on the up and up with when there's a political motive involved? And the answer, of course, is yes. The moment that you get across this thing of, well, wait a minute, they let Hillary Clinton off. Then right off the bat, you've seen the government itself having a dog in the hunt. The moment that you see them tell Comey to change how he talks about the election process, then you see the levels of government working at the behest of one of the candidates. Would I be shocked to find out that if it was working at the behest of one candidate, that it would be working against the other? I'm not shocked by that. The media doesn't even entertain that potential possibility. So let's keep going. 3 senior intelligence officials told NBC News that the intelligence community believed the states as of 2017 were Alaska, Arizona, California, Florida, Illinois, Texas, and Wisconsin. Now, let's keep going. All right. After NBC's report on the compromised states aired Tuesday night, Department of Homeland Security Acting Press Secretary Tyler Holton challenged the accuracy in a series of tweets. NBC's reporting tonight. In fact, I'll just show you DHS's pushback. Because DHS was saying, whoa, your report is massively overblown. You're making this look like it's something that it's not. You're acting as if I'm saying something that I didn't say. This is DHS media press release, Homeland Security. And this is Jeanette Manfra, the National Protection and Programs Directorate, Assistant Secretary for the Office of Cybersecurity and Communications. This was the statement she released. Recent NBC News reporting has misrepresented facts and confused the public with regards to the Department of Homeland Security and the state and local government efforts to combat election hacking. First off, let me be clear. We have no evidence, old or new, that any votes in the 2016 elections were manipulated by Russian hackers. NBC News continues to falsely report my recent comments on attempted election hacking, which clearly mirrors my testimony before the Senate Intelligence Committee last summer, as some kind of breaking news, incorrectly claiming a shift in the administration's position on cyber threats. As I said 8 months ago, a number of states were the target of Russian government cyber actors across vulnerabilities and access to the United States election infrastructure. In the majority of the cases, only preparatory activity like scanning was observed, while in a small number of cases, actors were able to access the system, but we have no evidence votes were changed or otherwise impacted. NBC's irresponsible reporting, which has been roundly criticized elsewhere in the media and by security experts alike, undermines the ability of the Department of Homeland Security, our partners at the Election Assistance Commission, and state and local officials across the nation to do our incredibly important jobs. I'm glad you have such a high opinion of yourself. While we'll continue to do our part to educate NBC and others on the threat, more importantly, the Department of Homeland Security and our state and local partners will continue our mission to secure the nation's electoral systems. So they're pushing back pretty hard. Now, the interesting part here is, there's a few interesting parts to this, but DHS is saying you guys are misleading the public. Like, you guys are trying to get across this idea that the systems itself were being compromised. Now, all of this, in many respects, may hinge on what the word compromise means. What does DHS mean by compromise? And what do the people who are talking in this situation mean by compromise? And the way that they're giving this report is giving across this impression that there was some kind of nefarious actions of these Russian hackers getting into the electoral process and all this other stuff, or the electoral system. Now, so let's keep going. We've heard DHS. All right, and just so we understand what they're saying, the officials say systems in the 7 states were compromised in a variety of ways, some with breaches more serious than others, from entry into state websites to penetration of actual voter registration databases. While the officials in Washington informed several of those states in the run-up to the election that foreign entities were probing their systems, none were told that the Russian government was behind it. The state officials told NBC News. Maybe they weren't told because maybe they weren't. Maybe they weren't told because maybe they weren't. But that's not considered. So let's get to this part. As we have consistently said, DHS has shared information with affected states in a timely manner. Right, I got to that part. Oh, right here. We have no intelligence, new or old, that corroborates NBC's reporting that state systems in 7 were compromised by Russian government actors. We believe tonight's story to be factually inaccurate and misleading. On Wednesday morning, however, Michael McDaniel, the top White House cyber official at the end of the Obama administration, told NBC News that the government's assessment when he left the White House in January 2017 was that networks in 7 states were compromised. He said he could not account for whether that assessment had changed in the past year. I hope you kind of see my point with this. Like, all of this is boiling down to people who are in the prior administration. The DHS now is saying, no, these systems weren't compromised. This was somewhat inaccurate and misleading. And again, I keep making the point that it depends on what you mean by compromise. All of these words that they're using are so slippery and sliding all over the place. And they're using these words to be slippery and slide all over the place for either defense or either for offense. At the end of the day, they're trying to be clear and murky intentionally. That's all I'm saying. What I am trying to get across are 2 main points. The news story here is using almost entirely one source of information. And even though I know it may be multiple people in the sense of that source, but that source came from one section, what the prior administration, not this administration. That's all I'm saying. I would have to believe, or is it possible that the people who were associated with the prior administration had some kind of political bias in this? The answer is yes. Of course the answer is yes. Is it possible that the DHS is lying about this? I don't know why they would lie about this, but yeah, I guess that it's possible. Yes, it's possible that everybody is lying because everybody has a political dog in the hunt. Fair enough. The media doesn't take that perspective, though. The media takes the perspective that, well, the previous intelligence guys are telling us this, and so it has to be true. So DHS may object to this, but ultimately, and the rest of the article, for all intents and purposes, ignores what DHS just said and plows into what the prior intelligence official said. And mind you, the people will have the most updated information. I love this part. When I left the White House in January 2017, it was that networks were compromised in the 7 states. I cannot account for whether that assessment had changed in the past year. Clearly, it has. Clearly, it has changed in the past year. Otherwise, DHS would not be sending out a press announcement saying that what the NBC News is reporting is factually inaccurate. There's another interesting part to this I want to show. All right, so right here. According to classified intelligence documents, the intelligence community defined compromise as actual entry into election websites, voter registration systems, and voter lookup systems. Now, the reason why they had to define it for you, and this is somewhat important also, according to classified intelligence documents, the intelligence community defines compromise as actual entry. You're talking to somebody, meaning you have sources. You're talking to people who are in the intelligence community. You're having a conversation with those people, and those people are explicitly telling you what's taking place. Why do you have to go through classified intelligence documents to get them to explain what compromises mean? It looked like they themselves would define their terms and explain what that means. Unless I'm misreading the sentence. According to classified intelligence documents, the intelligence community defines compromise as actual entry into election websites, voter registration systems, and voter lookup systems. The problem with this is in both cases it's still somewhat off. You would have to believe that DHS and the other people in the intelligence community are using different lingo. Meaning, even though this is classified intelligence, the information, the way they use their grammar, you're saying that these things will have to be different in some way because they're arguing over this word of compromise. I don't think the lingo changed between the time they DHS switched places, meaning between Trump and Obama. But either way, if you're talking to an intelligence asset, looks like you would just ask the intelligence asset, what do you mean by compromise? Be specific. As opposed to just kind of relying on the thing. I mean, this assumes that this is the exact definition that they were using when they were talking to them. That's all I'm saying. And we don't necessarily know if that's exactly true. NBC News reached out to all 7 states that were compromised. Again, take it as a word of God at this point. DHS has pushed back on this word. Fuck what DHS has to say. And we're just going to plow through. NBC News reached out to all 7 states that were compromised, as well as 14 additional states that DHS said were probed during the 2016 election. I don't know what probed means. That's another word. To this day, 6 of the 7 states denied that they were breached based on their own cyber investigations. It's a discrepancy that underscores how unprepared some experts think America is for the next wave of Russian interference that intelligence officials say is coming. That line is amazing. That line is amazing. What I mean by this is, look, DHS pushes back on a narrative that was propagated by people who were in the prior administration. We're talking about politics. The prior administration. The same prior administration that allowed Hillary Clinton to skate, that contorted the government itself in order to get members of the FBI like Comey to talk about the case as if it was in line with Hillary Clinton's campaign itself, as opposed to being the goddamn FBI that is not supposed to have a party affiliation associated with it. If they let that woman off, and if one bit of information comes up, one after the next, whether you want to call McCabe's wife, whether you want to say Strzok's in those text messages, whether you want to say the contact with Papadopoulos that ended up being somebody who was donating a massive amount of money to the Clinton Foundation, that Australian person who tipped it off, the diplomat. All of these things have links and association between the Clinton administration and the FBI. I guess I'm trying to get across this thing of there is a link in this, in the sense of the previous administration and allowing Hillary Clinton to walk on the things that she walked on, and simultaneously starting the case against Donald Trump. If the administration, and I'm not necessarily saying Obama was implicated in this, I'm just saying the administration itself. But if that's true, which it is true, by the way, Hillary Clinton should have been perp walked. Just based on the email thing alone, Hillary Clinton should have been perp walked. The FBI had already locked somebody up the prior year for the exact same thing. Comey made up a standard. Essentially, he created a standard that you couldn't necessarily hit. And he lied about that standard in that press conference. Isn't lying supposed to be an acknowledgement of guilt? Like, if Comey has to get up there and say no reasonable prosecutor will bring a case like this, and Comey is lying, then what is Comey lying about? I am making this point that it seems like the apparatus of government itself was contorted in order to work for one of the candidates. And it seems like it was also contorted to work against one of the other, allowing them to spy on Donald Trump's campaign when they had somewhat of a fig leaf to do it under. Even hiding certain information from the FISA judge in order to make sure this will go through. I can't look at this and assume that just because these guys are quote-unquote intelligence officials. Fact is, if they were in the last administration, they were tainted. And they shouldn't just take what these guys are saying as the word of God, even when the Department of Homeland Security is saying that what they're saying is not accurate. And beyond that, the states themselves are saying this is not true. NBC News reached out to all 7 states that were compromised. The states denied they were breached based on their own cyber investigations. Is it possible? Is it possible, to any degree that's possible, that states weren't breached? Is it possible that the states are right? Is it possible that DHS and those 6 states who said that none of this took place, you guys are saying something took place that didn't take place, is it possible that all of them are right? And that you're taking the word of the prior administration that something took place, and then you're kind of making assumptions based on that word from those that one source. And I'm not saying one source from the standpoint of one person. I'm saying all of those sources came from one particular administration. Right here. And then they go into it. It's a discrepancy that underscores how unprepared some experts think America is for the next wave of Russian interference that intelligence officials say it's coming. Hey, they interfered once. And you see these states, these stupid idiots don't even know that they were attacked by Russia. They couldn't even figure it out themselves. And so, since you're trusting us completely, and we're the ones who are saying that this took place, you can see how completely unprepared these states are. I mean, fucking stupid idiots didn't even know they were attacked. I'm making a point that the media is making this assumption that all of these states are wrong, and that the DHS is wrong, and that the people who are in the prior administration that literally has a dog in the hunt in this, those are the guys that are right. The intelligence professionals, the people who they're using for this, are from the previous administration. That's what I'm saying. And I'm basing this on the article itself. This is not me making this up. They start off saying, the U.S. intelligence community develops substantial evidence that stated, let's see, top secret intelligence requested by President Barack Obama in his last week in office identified 7 states where analysts, right? 3 senior intelligence officials told NBC News that the intelligence community believed the states as of 2017, because Donald Trump was taken office afterwards. All of this, these are people who are in the prior administration. That's what I'm getting at. The media is completely uncritical of the story, and that, for all intents and purposes, just becomes stenographers. The last guy said it. We like that last guy a hell of a lot better than this guy, so we're just going to run with it. They give no credence to the Republicans' idea at all. And I understand Republicans have shot themselves in the foot because they've lied, tremendously, and under normal circumstances, they're usually only out for themselves. And this is not a circumstance. It's different. They are out for themselves. They have a political actor in this, in a sense. They don't want Donald Trump taken out that office. They don't want the R taken from his name or being impeached in this way. But so do Democrats. Let's be honest in this. And not just Democrats, the media. The media has stuck with this narrative for the past 2 years, even though they can't necessarily nail down this narrative. And the best that they can get out of the last 2 years is that Russia had Facebook and Twitter ads, more than half of which took place after the election. That's what they got. They started with Trump and Russia, and that's where they ended up. NBC News is blowing off what's being told to them by the states. It's blowing off what's being told to them by the Department of Homeland Security. And it is purely relying on what's taking place or what's being said by intelligence officers from the prior administration. The same prior administration that allowed Hillary Clinton to walk, and that created a pretext that allowed Donald Trump to be put under this Trump and Russia nonsense. I'm saying that these guys are glorified stenographers. That's what I'm saying. There's one more part to this. The states themselves, and I'll put the article down because there's a little bit more nuance in the sense of one of the states says that there was some weird, shady business going on. I think it was Illinois. But I'll let you read the article yourself. I'm just trying to point out this thing of the way that the article is constructed and the biases and the biases that are built into the perspective of the story. From what we know at this point, to give actual context to this, if you're going to write a story like this, it looks like you would also add a little bit more context so your audience can understand how to frame this for the wider world. WikiLeaks exposed that the NSA or the CIA built an NSA inside the CIA so it could spy on countries all across the world and meddle in other people's elections. Now, this includes a set of hacking tools. This includes the capacity to mimic and leave signatures to make it look like other people had infected a system. I'm saying, does NBC News know that we do this? Does the news themselves know that we do this? Meaning, does the media know that we've done this, that we intrude into other people's elections, that we hack into other people's systems, that we leave bugs or that we leave devices that allows us to listen and watch other people's systems, that we were spying on all of these countries across the world? Does the media know this? Doesn't know this. Well, one more point to this, and I say that because I try to add this context of, even if what you're saying is right, you still don't have moral standing. You don't have standing. If you want to fix your issues, then fix your issues. Paper ballots. Make sure your systems are a little bit stronger than what they are. But I got to be honest, of all the issues that need to be fixed, let's start at gerrymandering. Let's start at bribery, meaning open bribery, being able to buy off politicians for corporate interests or for super PACs or whatever. Let's start with those. Let's start with not being able to throw people off the rolls. Let's start with automatic signups for voting, meaning the moment that you're born, the moment you get a social security number, you have the right to vote. There's a lot of places I want to start. Russia is not on that list at all, or at the very least is far, far down on that list. All of this stuff is obfuscation. The media is using this to put asses in seats. Democrats are looking for a way to explain how the woman could lose that election to reality shows. And for all intents and purposes, let's be honest. They have not made their case. They have not made their case. And I suspect that part of the reason why all of the fuck-ups and all of the errors that were attributed over the past 2 years that Trump has been in office, and all of them have gone into one direction, is because they have a very specific bias that goes against Trump and goes in favor of the democratic message between Trump and Russia. Everything is put through the meat grinder of that particular filter. If something takes place, then it needs to go through that particular filter. We know that Trump colluded with Russia. We know that the Russians were trying to hack the government. So anything that happens in the world, even when there's evidence to go against it, it is still filtered through that lens. That is the only way you can completely ignore what DHS told you and what the states themselves told you. You can use it as competing evidence, fair enough. But I don't understand why they would just assume that the prior administration is giving them honest information, but the new administration, for whatever reason, is not. Both have a dog in the hunt. You should explore the incentives built into the system itself. It is impossible for them to know with flat fact certainty what took place. So let's build that into the system. But beyond that, if you're dealing with this and you're actually trying to take somewhat of an objective viewpoint of it, and I know objective, no such thing in this case, we're human beings, but to not assume that the people, the other intelligence officers, are telling you something that's the word of God, and you act as stenographers and take it as being absolutely true and build your article off of something that you heard from the prior administration. One last point to this before I bring in the audience, and I know this has gone a little bit long. There were intrusions into some of the states. There were intrusions. The states themselves have said that, no, we haven't seen any Russian attacks or anything like that from the systems. I think it was like one state that said they saw some kind of interaction. And understand, even then, you have to be very careful and particular about the words to make sure that the euphemism that they're using is the same euphemism that you use in your head, if that makes sense. Like to say the probed. Does probe to them mean the exact same thing as probe to you? Maybe, maybe not. The scan mean the same thing to them as it means to you. I'm just making this point that the words that they use are often used to obfuscate what's actually being said. It understands that people have a certain connotation of things, and they're using those words in order to get across a little bit more of that connotation or feed into the connotation. If anybody put them on point blank, they would say, I never said that. I never said that. You're implying XYZ. Those states, or many of those states, didn't have any intrusions. At least not from Russia. They weren't able to find intrusions from Russia. Who they were able to find intrusions from was the DHS. I shit you not. And by the way, just before I get to this point, again, a lot of this depends on what the words compromise mean. DHS is pushing back strongly on what NBC News is saying. If DHS is saying, just so we're clear, I'll come back to it. Let's do this first. Homeland Security assessed other websites' survey finds. The National Association of Secretaries of State wants federal office officials to help resolve concerns that the Department of Homeland Security computer made questionable visits to a number of state computers in recent months. And by the way, this was December 2016. The organization based in Washington wants to make sure that we help the states in question get a quicker resolution to this matter from the Department of Homeland Security, and that there is a way to resolve it to everyone's satisfaction. Kay Stimson, spokesman for the association, told the Atlanta Journal-Constitution on Thursday. The organization surveyed its members after Georgia's Secretary of State Brian Kemp's staff traced what it considers a cyber threat against its network to the Department of Homeland Security-owned computer. The agency has denied any attempt to penetrate Georgia's protected systems. Kentucky and West Virginia were among the 48 states that agreed to allow DHS to perform security checks on the election system. In August, Georgia, at Kemp's direction, was one of two who refused. The DHS computer involved in the current dust-up was not part of the agency's scan of the state systems, meaning this was not the same computer that was supposed to be scanning their systems. This was a different computer. Bradford Queen, spokesman for the Kentucky Secretary of State Allison Grimes, said the National Association of Secretaries of States, at Kemp's request, asked if other states had experienced similar attempts to access the systems. Our office investigated and found that in a handful of instances, an IP address allegedly sourced to the Department of Homeland Security had accessed our public voter information and online voter registration websites, Queen said. But they found no attempt to scan, attack, or infiltrate our systems, that the visits appeared to be regular web traffic. The responses from Kentucky and West Virginia would seem to bolster Homeland Security's claim that the federal contractor based in Georgia used the computer in question to perform routine background checks of job applicants. The contractor, contacted the Secretary of State's website to check professional licensing database housed there. DHS Secretary Jay Johnson said in a letter to Kemp earlier this week. We've been in touch with both states, and this appears to be the normal website traffic, a DHS official told the Atlanta Journal-Constitution Thursday. The official was not authorized to speak on the record. But that doesn't explain why the contractor was on Kentucky's election website at all. Kentucky's Secretary of State does not process professional licenses, and it seems unlikely that the contractor would need to assess that information. You understand what's being said? And I love this. In NBC News, for all intents and purposes, they just were stenographers. This is what people in the previous administration told us, so this is what we're going to recount. This is what DHS said, so this is what we're going to recount. You make the choice. Now, unfortunately, it's not a you make the choice. I mean, clearly they have a particular perspective in it. They go down 2 or 3 paragraphs before they ever even get to DHS kind of pushing back on what they were saying. And even when the state said this is not true, I mean, our systems weren't compromised. Even after that, NBC News kind of still plows through along with the story with their prior perspective. In this case, these guys are like, yeah, we contacted the Department of Homeland Security, and the Department of Homeland Security gave us a load of bunk. Why on earth would they be going into our election sites? Why would they be either attacking, scanning, probing, whatever word you want to use, our election sites for something that had nothing to do, or their excuse had nothing to do with elections? You're saying this was some kind of job applicant. You're in our election sites. Why are you in our election sites? I love this. I love the skepticism in it. Let's keep going. But that doesn't explain why the contractor was on Kentucky's election site's website at all. Kentucky's Secretary of State does not process professional licenses, and it seems unlikely the contractor would need to assess election results. Morgan Wright, a senior fellow at the Center for Digital Government and owner of Virginia-based cyber strategy firm, says DHS explanation does not hold up. How does a standard laptop, get configured like this, but no others? Wright said. It appears to be this one magic computer that makes it all appear like malicious scan. Either DHS isn't being completely honest, or there's competency issues, Wright said. How does a computer get configured to do those things and not be detected, he said. What does it tell you about DHS's ability to defend itself from attack? Kemp on Wednesday said he was not satisfied with the response thus far from the Department of Homeland Security and asked President Donald Trump to order a full investigation once he inaugurated in January. Efforts to reach Trump's communication staff were unsuccessful on Thursday. That was in Obama's term. All of this was in Obama's term. I'm making the point that NBC News is pretending as the people in the previous administration were the words of God, and that these guys are telling us, you know, all the good things and all the right things. And even though it's contradicting with what's being said from the Trump administration, clearly the people who are in the previous administration, we like those guys. Those guys are telling us the truth. They're telling us the word of God. They're completely uncritical of this. The secretaries of states in the prior states asked the damn good question. Why does it look like the Department of Homeland Security was attacking our websites and our voting websites? That seems peculiar to us. Why is that taking place? The media doesn't seem to be all that curious about this. They just tend to go and plot along, not necessarily trying to connect any dots, not trying to give people a wider context, not even asking the larger questions in the sense of, well, wait a minute. If the Department of Homeland Security, why were there no systems? For instance, that by itself is a damn good question. The Department of Homeland Security gave somewhat of a shitty answer to that question. That's a fucking amazing question. How did Hillary Clinton get off? That's an amazing question. I'm trying to make this point that asking questions that kind of lead to a certain, how can I say this? The media didn't seem to be all that curious on how Hillary Clinton got off. I don't understand how she got off. And I'm saying it in that way for the reason I'm saying it that way. If it's true that there was a previous case that the FBI convicted somebody on, and we know they've convicted people for minor infractions, let alone something as major as putting secrets out there for people to be able to steal and people to be able to take. If you can show that there is a high likelihood that they contorted the political apparatus itself or the governing apparatus to go in favor of a particular candidate, if you can show, which I think there is evidence to show, I think there's decent evidence to show, that the FBI itself was leaning a particular way, in order to get one person off and at the same token put somebody else on. Even from the standpoint of incentives, does the Obama administration want his Secretary of State to be perp walked? The answer, of course, is no. He is not going to want that woman to be perp walked. Is a Democratic Party, is a president, the head of the Democratic Party, meaning Obama at that point, is he in a situation where he would want somebody else that's going to be running for president perp walked? Is there incentive at all for Loretta Lynch to lean on Comey to say a particular thing? We know there's incentive because she did it. Otherwise, she wouldn't have did it. I'm trying to make this point that NBC News is making this full well assumption that what they're being told to by the previous administration is completely true. And I'm saying they should not make that assumption. There is enough oddities and evidence here that gets across that there may be some shady dealings that are taking place with regards to the previous administration, their spying on Trump, and even collusion between the Democratic Party and the FBI. The news ignores all of this. Ignores all of this. To go back to my original point before I close this, they kept asking, why didn't Obama do anything? Why didn't Obama do anything? Why didn't Obama, raise a red flag? Why didn't he bitch and moan and scream at the top of his lungs that Russia was trying to influence the election? Why on earth did he not say anything? If they full well understood that they had that information showing they were being attacked, if they understood that that attack was coming from Russia, and if they knew it, if they could nail it down, why didn't Obama not say anything? And is it more likely that knowing that the Russian government was trying to get Donald Trump elected, at least based on their own hypothesis of the case, that you would allow the person who was in your party to just lose that contest, or to be in a worse situation to lose that contest, as opposed to saying something about it and trying to flag it and trying to control the events? I think it's more likely that the reason why he never said anything to these states and that they didn't raise a red flag in the way that people are asking why didn't they do anything or say anything was because there was nothing to say and there was nothing to do. The stuff was made out of whole cloth in order to tar the incoming president. That's what I think. I honestly believe it. I don't have this rosy and rainbows picture of the last administration. I know people have this tendency to think that these guys are similar to them. Like, people have this weird, not a weird habit, but they think that people relate to the world in the way they themselves relate to the world. It's not necessarily true. It's not necessarily true at all. So let's bring people in. Oh, wow. We have people here. Bernard Foster. Sup? What's up, man? Thank you, dude. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Guys, by the way, I appreciate the Super Cash and the patrons and all this other stuff. It is a big help. One of the biggest annoyances when they took me down for the live stream, it was like, fuck, I lost interaction with my audience. And I just lost interaction with my audience. I even lost capacity for Super Cash. It like puts a knife in you in this weird way. Then they come back later and be like, our bad. They be like, our bad. Jay Scott, this is a month-old story. Yeah, Jay, I know. I didn't say it was today. I saw it today. This came out in February, I believe. Yes, February 28th. It's not a month, though. It's like 5 days. Yeah, it's like 5 days old. Stephanie Thomas. Hi, Jamal. Just wanted to do a live shout out to the Toronto, Canada. You're awesome. Hi, Steph Tom. Tome. Let's call this Tome. Stephanie Tome. Thank you. I appreciate it, Stephanie. Badger Damon. How bad was it? Oh, yeah. Did you see Cenk pose on Russia? Patrice Pierre. I did not. What were his pose on Russia? I'm curious. I'm curious on this one. Tabitha Enriquez. Jamal, DHS hacked Indiana and Idaho too. That's fucking amazing. Richard Russ. Jamal, do you really believe that Obama had choice or that he was in charge? I think he was in... Yeah, I think he was in charge, but I think those things are with caveats around it. If that makes sense. Like, I don't need to, I think Obama was in charge in the same way that you or I are in charge, if that makes sense. It's like, there's certain measures and means that you can control somebody. You don't necessarily have to have this hard power against it. If the incentives are built for you to go in a particular way, you go in the way of the incentives. It's not the easiest thing. Think of all the extraordinary people that you've had over history, like people who went through difficult times. Think of like Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. Think of Gandhi or of Mandela, like these people who are in these really hellish situations. Some of the Palestinians getting their heads beat in by Israeli soldiers in their protests. Think of the shittiness those people went through. But also understand that there's millions of those people that are in the same situation. It was only like a small, tiny percentage that bubble up to the top that actually push back against the system that they found themselves. I don't necessarily think you need this kind of hard force or this hard power in order to get people to comply and behave a particular way. Like, I understand some people think that other people were working the scenes and everything else. I don't know why they think that. Your world can be the way your world is just through the incentives that are built into the system the way it is, if that makes sense. If that makes sense. But to be honest, there's no way to absolutely know. I mean, it's always going to be some level of ambiguous. In a weird way, you choose what you believe. You choose it. There's no way to be certain as a flat fact. We'll find you, Jamal. We're loyal to real progressive voices. Luz dances. Ah, thanks, Luz. I just try to be a person. Progress the label doesn't really matter. I honestly, I look at this stuff from a humanistic perspective. When I come to a judgment on this, I try to do a few things. Is this going to get anybody killed? That's the first question. Is this going to make people's lives better? Is this going to make people's lives worse? Do they have a potential to lie? What are the incentives built into the process? What are the incentives of the people who are analyzing that process? Like you come up with this amalgam and trying to come up with almost like an equation to figure what side you lean more towards on to anything else. But your underlying basis on this stuff, at least for me, tends to boil down to humanistic concerns. Humanistic concerns. What allows people to be free? Obama should have been audacious, not passive. Cheeky rogue. I agree with you, cheeky rogue, but that just assumes that he was an audacious president in the first place. Like, look, I know some lefties may not admit this, but I'm man enough to admit this. I have a certain amount of compassion for Trump supporters. I do. I absolutely do. Because I understand this thing of believing somebody was going to actually do something. And you investing a certain amount of yourself into that person. I don't necessarily understand why they invested themselves into Donald Trump. But nevertheless, they finally found a Republican that is talking about increasing the minimum wage, is talking about keeping them out of wars, and all this other stuff, in addition to getting the cultural part that they like, the being, slightly racist part that they like. Or at the very least, not... No, I don't want to say that, because that's not fair. There's a certain section of the party, and I think people try to label the entirety of the party based on the section of the party. But my point is, the cultural heritage and everything else, in addition to having the ability to say, okay, we're going to raise the minimum wage, we're not going to lower taxes on the rich. I mean, this is the stuff that Trump was saying. He ran to the left when he was in that contest. And then he gets in office. And it's establishment 2.0. Now, most people knew that he was lying. Lefties were kind of looking at this saying, guys, trust us, he's lying to you. They went along with it. He's going to make America great again. One of the weirdest things, videos I watched, Ted Cruz was talking to a bunch of Trump supporters. And they're like, you're full of shit and Donald Trump is the man and all this other stuff. And Ted Cruz, in his schmarmy, fake face way, is looking at them saying like, no, man, I'm going to win this and Donald Trump is lying to you, etc., etc. And they were so believing and they were so trusting. Oh, they were so believing and trusting. It was the saddest thing you would ever see in your life. And I watched that and I'm like, God, those people are going to have a magnificent letdown. Now, lefties went through our own version of this, meaning we watched the first 4 years and we kept telling ourselves, Obama's playing 5-dimensional chess. Obama's going to rip the chains off. He's going to like rip his shirt off and his muscles are just going to be bulging and, he's going to lose it. He's going to flip out in his second term. And that never happened. And what we realized at some point was, oh, he wasn't pretending to be a moderate Republican. He was just a moderate Republican. It doesn't matter what he says. It matters what he's willing to do and what he's actually going to do. Obama wasn't audacious because Obama wasn't audacious. That's my point. That's my point. This idea of image and everything else. This stuff is just image. It's a brand. It's like Pepsi or Coke. It's like when you crack open a Pepsi, does butterflies and rainbows go jumping around the room, and does an alien fly down with an umbrella and tell you sweet things in your ear? No, that shit doesn't happen. That shit only happens in the movies and on television. And that's advertising. That's advertising. Reality of it is usually different. And in this case, the reality was magnificently different. They wanted to believe somebody, and Donald Trump gave them something to believe in. Obama had hope and change. Donald Trump had make America great again. And they're off to the races. They wanted something fundamentally different. And they did not get the thing that they wanted that was fundamentally different. That's honestly what it boils down to. So, it's honestly what it boils down to. He can say that because he doesn't look back. That Dutch guy. It's the schoolyard mentality, only with grown-ups and governments. Only now, the bullying isn't beating you up, taking your lunch money. It's killing peeps and taking your house and life savings. Fucked up, ain't it? Fucked up. Joe Hickey. When did he say he'd raise the minimum wage? Marla 79. So when he was on the campaign trail, he said Trump said he was going to up the minimum wage to $10 an hour. I can't tell you exactly the moment when he said it. I'm just saying he was throwing out a lot of stuff. But he did say he was going to up the minimum wage to $10 an hour. I kind of want to say he was on the set of the Today Show, but I could be lying to myself on the Today Show thing. But he did say it. Fact check me, but he did say it. Compassion leads to understanding. Robert Bouquet Ray, compassion does lead to understanding. Agreed. I would say somewhat of a flat fact. Trump playing 5-dimensional hungry hippos. Oh, Osama London, that's wrong. That's wrong. Cheeky Road, we got played. We did get played. We did get played. I mean, I remember talks about the public option. I remember talking about the wars and all this other stuff. We should have known that we were going to be in a shit show when Obama accepted the Nobel Peace Prize, and his speech was boiling down to this thing of, if I'm not mistaken, his speech was something like a just war or the necessity of some wars. And you're like, wow, he's getting the Nobel Peace Prize talking about war. It's like, shit, man. Yeah. Yeah. The only thing he changed was the color of the presidency, given the false perception that if America could vote for an Afro-American, we were a truly progressive nation. Yes, but it does give that perception, but that's not a perception that he himself pushed out, per se. At least I don't think it is. It's something that the public pushed on him. This goes into my thing with the words thing. What does hope and change mean? What does it mean? I don't know what that means. People have this tendency to, they hear a word and they just automatically assume that that person exactly means the same thing that they mean. Like, it was a nice day out. What does that mean? What does that mean? The systems were scanned. What does that mean? I'm going to make America great again. I have no idea what that means. I have no idea what that means. We're going to have hope and change. I have no clue what that means. Platitudes are used so you yourself can invest into those words. What do I need to believe? This person is saying something. What do I invest into the words that this person is telling me? If they're not being specific to you, then they're telling you this kind of euphemistic language so you can invest something into it. They don't want to give you the reality if they're not giving you the reality of it. But yeah, we're played. We were played. A future to believe in. Yeah, that too. Another slogan. Future to believe in. And right, and it's like, what does that mean? I don't know what that means either. Patrice Pierre. 93% corporations, 73% Russia. I don't know what that means. I don't know what the poll means. Don't forget thoughts and prayers. Yeah. I keep making this point that we need another party. Oh, you're talking about interference in the election. Oh, that's hilarious. That's hilarious. Their own audience. I'm going to have to check that out. I'm going to have to check that out. Because if that's true, that's awesome. With all the red baiting and red menacing that these guys have been doing on the TYT network, they do a poll and they say 93% of corporate, like it was more corporations and only 7% Russia. That means that the overwhelming majority of their audience does not give two shits about the Russia thing. This is making me optimistic. Honestly, I'm shocked as shit by this. This is making me optimistic. I am going to do a video on that. Yeah. Because what that's telling me we're in our sandbox. And I make two basic arguments on the Russia thing. It completely lacks context. These people are acting hysterical. They're screaming at the top of their lungs that a nuclear-powered nation attacked us in some way. Now, again, this gets into these definitions. What does he mean by attacked? If you're going to use words like 9/11 and Pearl Harbor, what is the connotation that you're trying to get across to me and to the rest of the public? You're trying to get across this idea of a threat, that something happened to us, that somehow we were harmed by this. Democrats jump the shark and go with this idea that Trump colluded with Russia in order to make this take place. Then it became Russia is doing this in order to help Trump. Then it became Russia is doing this in order to help Trump and Bernie Sanders and Jill Stein, and to help the environmental movement, and to help Black Lives Matter, and to help Muslims who are angry that the person who was going to run for office was potentially going to destabilize a country or take down a country's regime change. Russia was used for everything, and the mainstream media has been pushing this shit out like nobody's business. My basic argument is, A, we don't know if that's absolutely true, and we weren't. They weren't right. So they changed their narrative, they changed their story. Then it became, okay, we found 13 trolls. We found trolls. We found people writing Facebook and Twitter ads, half of which took place after the election. Now, this gets conflated into still using the language of attacked, but they're using Facebook and Twitter ads. And half of these things took place after the election. None of these things were saying anything that was, just kind of out there. It was staying within the same campaign rhetoric. They use this as a way, again, to attack Russia and to tar Trump and to tar Bernie Sanders and to tar anybody else that they don't particularly like. Whether this took place or not is kind of besides the point to me. Did it have an effect? Did it have an effect? It's like, A, you haven't proven your case, and B, if you did prove your case, it didn't have an effect. A, you haven't nailed it down. You haven't shown the collusion that you guys have been screaming about. And B, even if you did nail it down, you have not gotten across that it had any impact at all. None. And beyond not having any impact, we do the same thing. We do the same thing. So when you have these lefty networks out there pushing this particular narrative, and I think that the public is watching this, and I think to myself, God damn it, they're giving this public a perspective as if this other country somehow attacked and undermined us, without necessarily getting across the wider context that we do the same shit around the globe and we do it worse. We do it worse. It makes me feel fucking awesome that their audience believes the same. It makes me feel fucking awesome. Because even if the audience accepts what's being said to them is true, meaning even if they say, okay, I can agree with the Russian hack this stuff. Okay, fair enough. Or at the very least, Russia intermingled with the election. But to look at this and say, yeah, but that's not the biggest impact. The biggest impact on this was corporate interests and these other factors that influenced the election. I love that. I love that. At the very least, it seems like the people are putting it in context in regards to what's important and what's not. So I love that. It gives me a certain amount of hope. It gives me a certain amount of hope. Basil Peterson. Jamal, love your piece with Ron Placone. Kudos. Yeah, thank you. Ron was fucking awesome. Ron was fucking awesome. I loved it. Yeah. That Dutch man. I like Jimmy Dore, but Jank, nah, man. Can't stand that guy anymore. Yeah, he's becoming overbearing to me too. Yeah, a little bit. And it's funny, man, because I've said this before, Jink was my favorite person on TYT. Hands down. During the Sanders thing, he was one of my favorites. And yeah, he's become somewhat unbearable. So, it is what it is. Stephen Benson. I think there's a calculation that Russia will back down Syria. Back down how? How? Back down in what way? I mean, they made this shit out of whole cloth. Fuck, man. Like, look, selective justice is not justice. Understand what I'm saying when I mean this. Understand what I mean when I'm saying this. Selective justice is not really justice. That's one person being selective in regards to who they want to prosecute and who they don't. So, people want to take shots at Trump. Nobody wanted to bring up the Clinton Foundation. Nobody wants to bring that up at all. But they definitely want to take shots at Trump. If you went at Trump with the emollients clause, you would not hear one peep. In fact, I would probably be on this show agreeing that this is fair game. But you're pivoting us against the nuclear power nation for the point of politics. That's fucking dangerous. That's dangerous. The wild part about this is shows like TYD would turn around and say that Russia is provocating with us and that now we need to do something from a standpoint of some kind of military escalation or some kind of escalation, not military escalation, but doing something to push back against Russian aggression. And it's like, you mean aggression by defending themselves? What the fuck are you talking about? You have troops on their goddamn borders. Like, I like that poll. That's all I'm gonna say. I like that poll. I like that poll a lot. How do you feel about the elections, or did it miss it? I haven't seen all the elections. I saw a few people who made it through. I saw the woman in Texas that Democrats tried to attack. I saw she got through at least to the runoffs. But I haven't followed all of them. There was another one where DA got in that I know some lefties were looking for it. Why would Russia back down? It's there. It's where they live. And there's that. I thought you meant, yeah. It's that. And by the way, not just Laura Mosler. Yeah. It's not just back down. What does back down mean? I'm trying to get at the point of what does that mean? What does back down mean? Does that mean we're going to take out, we're going to stop interacting with the Ukraine? We're going to move our troops away from the border? What does that mean? Back down. What does that mean? And what way? I don't know what that means. You have NATO troops at their Russian border, literally at their border. You have all of these NATO nations increasing the amount of money that they've been spending on their military. You have the Democratic Party saber-rattling like nobody's business, talking about Russia attacked them, Russia created 9/11, Russia did Pearl Harbor. You have all of these guys screaming that environmentalists were being manipulated by Russian bots. Bernie supporters were being manipulated by Russian bots. Muslims were being manipulated by Russian bots. Like, I'm trying to get across this thing of there's a hysteria aimed at Russia. I don't understand what it means for them to back down in this case. And in a situation where one side is being hysterical and being batshit crazy and is being somewhat of a screw loose, what does it mean to back down? Do you unilaterally stop defending yourself? What does it mean to back down? That's what I'm getting at. There is no capacity to back down. I mean, how do you back down? We're in the Ukraine helping neo-Nazis. Like, put this shit in context. We're in the Ukraine assisting neo-Nazis. Now, those neo-Nazis are going to get weapons, and those weapons are going to be used to shoot and kill Russians. That's a proxy war. We're in Syria now illegally. The actual government of Syria, Bashar al-Assad, is working with the Russian government, Vladimir Putin. They have an alliance. That alliance means that they are the legal, based on international law, they're legal to be in that particular country. It's their fucking country. Now, the United States is in that country illegally. The United States does not care that it's in that country illegally. The news media doesn't bring up the fact that the United States is in that country immediately. They completely ignore that fact. They completely ignore that. Now, when we go out and we killed like 100 Syrians, those weren't Nerf bombs. I know Cenk Uygur likes to use, this idea of a Nerf bomb. Those weren't Nerf bombs. Those were actual real bombs. Those were actually hurting and killing and injuring people. What does it mean to back down when the United States is being the aggressor in this situation? What does that mean? Can you imagine this oddity of situation where Russia puts troops into Mexico because there's some kind of drug cartel, some kind of drug war going on, and Russia says, well, we're going to go into Mexico, and the United States and the Mexican government are working in an alliance. And they say, no, we don't need your assistance with this. And Russia said, fuck it, we're staying. We're staying. You're just going to have to deal with it. What would have been the perspective of the United States in that very specific situation? I mean, for all intents and purposes, that is what's going on right now in Syria. The United States has invested itself into another nation that does not want it to be there at all. And in not wanting it to be there at all is even killing the participants or the citizens of that nation. How, in this case, does Russia back down? And is it Russia that needs to back down? We're in their sphere of influence. We're in their sphere of influence. So, yeah, let's put this shit in perspective. Oh, Redneck Economic, thank you. Welcome back. Thank you. I appreciate it. Glad to be back. Glad to be back. I haven't seen a show of yours for a while. I haven't seen a show of yours for a while. I haven't seen if you made a video. I used to watch every so often your vids in the morning. Redneck Economics. It has Cuba. Yeah, and we were willing to start a nuclear war over that. We were willing to start a nuclear war over that. So, put this shit in context. That's what I'm saying. And Cuba was slightly different. Cuba was off our shores. I'm talking about on the border. That's what I'm trying to get at. Like, extraordinarily close to the border. But you're right. Cuba is close. Cuba's also, you could say, is on our shores. They were willing to go to war over that. Like nuclear war, the United States, we were literally willing to destroy the world over that. What is a commiserate response in Syria and Russia in this case? Meaning, what is the response of Russia should be in this case? If the United States was literally willing to go to nuclear war in order to get those weapons out of Syria, out of Cuba. I'm just saying, we look at the world in a way that is fundamentally not fair. That's what I'm saying. The news media looks at the world in a way that is fundamentally not fair, and it's often just straight up dishonest. It doesn't provide context to what it's saying. It doesn't provide context. And by the way, I don't think they don't provide context because they didn't know it. I mean, there's been things that I've gotten wrong. There's been things where I go back later, it's like, ooh, I probably shouldn't have said it that way. I probably should have just cut it slightly differently. But it's different than trying to actually mislead. That's what I'm saying. The perspective of the media is always that the United States, whatever it's doing for the right reasons. Now, we may fuck up, we may be incompetent, we may kill a lot of people, but ultimately it's for the right reasons. I'm saying that's bogus. You shouldn't take that perspective. That's not an honest perspective. If the same situation happened in reverse, we wouldn't necessarily take that perspective of where they were trying to do it for the right reasons. They just fucked up. We'd just say they hacked us, they attacked us. It was 9/11. We'd say shit like that. We had better diplomacy and diplomats back then. We don't have them now. That Dutch guy. Yeah, man. I've said the same thing. I've asked this question. Would you have preferred a Donald Trump or John Kennedy? During the Cuban Missile Crisis, you had the political gravitas of a John F. Kennedy. And maybe, and I'm saying that's not fully fair. I mean, John F. Kennedy has gravitas now for all sorts of reasons and all sorts of cultural things that I have in my head over. I don't necessarily know his gravitas back then. I do know they used to call it Camelot and other stuff. It's kind of besides the point. He has a magnificent amount of political acumen. I don't think anybody doubted that. Yes, him being a person fucks up like anybody else fucks up. You can make a case that the Cuban Missile Crisis was in some respects his fault, or the CIA's trying to kill Castro. So fair enough, he's not necessarily a perfect person. But certainly he has enough political skill and acumen to keep us out of a goddamn nuclear war. Do you trust the neocons, the batshit crazies who are off the political spectrum, who are in that office now, to be able to do the same? I do not. I do not at all. I don't. He did have gravitas back then. Hey, hun, thank you. I thought he did. Yeah. The Syria over Russia is a sleight of hand used to transition us for a war on terror without having to dismantle the extrajudicial powers over foreign policy and domestic security. Blair, 1980. Fucking A. That's a good point. That's a good point. It's a transition. It's like we're spending $1 trillion in the military. We need to come up with a reason to spend that $1 trillion on the military. Let's just say Russia. Let's just say Russia. Let's move away from terror. Let's say Russia. Yeah. All right, guys. I'm going to end this. I have another 1 or 2 videos coming up. So remember, I have next Wednesday, Hard Bastard is going to be here. I'm going to figure out the time that he's coming on. And so is Grant Cameron. Grant Cameron is a ufologist. He deals with consciousness and UFO research. The man is fucking amazing. The man is fucking amazing. He's one of my favorite UFO guys. And consciousness researchers. So that should be an amazing fucking interview. That's not one to be missed. And Hard Bastard, that's another one you shouldn't miss. We're going to talk about media and the censorship that's taking place right now. So both of those should be damn good. Both of those are going to take place on Wednesday. I am bad at scheduling, so that's why both of those things are ending up on the same day. But fuck it, I'm going with it. So, all right, guys. I am going to head out. I will probably be back in probably another 15 minutes. You guys have a good one. Thanks, everyone.